The hospital has a long and brutal history, beginning when its own architect became mentally unwell and hacked his workers to death with an axe. He was convicted and sentenced to spend the rest of his life in the very same hospital he had been building. The hospital was built in honor of Elizabeth Arkham, the mother of hospital founder Amadeus. The hospital's dark history began in the early 1900s when Amadeus's mother Elizabeth, having suffered from mental illness most of her life, committed suicide. However, it was later revealed that the man had actually euthanized his own mother and had repressed the memory. Amadeus then decided, as the sole heir to the estate, to remodel his family home in order to properly treat the mentally ill, so others might not suffer the same fate as his mother. Thus the establishment of the Elizabeth Arkham Asylum for the Criminally Insane. During the period of the hospital's remodeling, Amadeus received a call from the police notifying him that a serial killer by the name of Martin Hawkins had referred to the asylum shortly before escaping the state psychiatric hospital. They wanted to know his opinion about what the murderer's state of mind might be. Shortly after that phone call, Amadeus Arkham returned to his home to find his front door wide open. Inside, he discovered the mutilated corpses of his wife and daughter in an upstairs room, with Martin Hawkins' alias, Mad Dog, carved into his daughter Harriet's body. Despite this family tragedy, the hospital officially opened that November. With his sanity now in tatters, Dr. Arkham designed a floor plan that evoked occult runes. He believed that the pattern would drive away the mysterious bat that haunted his dreams. One of its first patients was Martin Mad Dog Hawkins, whom Amadeus insisted on treating personally. After treating Mad Dog for 6 months, Amadeus strapped him to an electroshock couch, then deliberately and purposefully electrocuted him. The staff treated the death as an accident, but it contributed to Amadeus's gradual descent into mental illness himself, which he began to believe was his birthright. Eventually, Amadeus was a patient in his own hospital after he tried to kill his stockbroker in 1929, where he dies, scratching the words of a binding spell in the walls and floor of his cell with his fingernails and belting out the Star-Spangled Banner in a loud voice. The Elizabeth Arkham Hospital for the Criminally Insane is better known by fans of comic books as simply Arkham Asylum, the fictitious asylum in the city of Gotham where the criminally insane rogues gallery of Batman's foes are sent for treatment. But Arkham Asylum is based on a real place, a hospital by the name of Danvers. So infamous is the hospital that aside from writers at DC Comics, even H.P. Lovecraft took inspiration from it for his writings. I'm Darren Marlar, and this is Weird Darkness. Welcome, Weirdos! This is Weird Darkness. Here you'll find stories of the paranormal, supernatural, legends, lore, mysterious, macabre, unsolved, and unexplained. Coming up in this episode of Weird Darkness, Mother Shipton was known for her prognostication skills, but she was even more well-known for her grotesque appearance. So much so that she was nicknamed the York Witch, the Devil's Bastard, the Devil's Daughter, but others have another word for her – hoax. A family heirloom begins acting strange when a woman moves into her deceased grandmother's home. Is it possible that ghosts, visions, and other paranormal experiences are not only real but also good for your mental health? After it closed, the old hospital site became a popular destination for thrill-seeking kids looking for the scare of a lifetime. Why does Danvers State Hospital rank among history's most infamous asylums? And attend any amateur magic show, and most assuredly you will hear a certain word used at least once. Why do illusionists say it? What does it mean, if anything? We'll look at the very interesting history behind the word abracadabra. Now, bolt your doors, lock your windows, turn off your lights, and come with me into the weird darkness. History remembers Nostradamus and his predictions fairly well, but lesser known is his English counterpart, Mother Shipton. The Yorkshire seer was born in a cave in 1488 as Ursula Soothtel and was known for her grotesque appearance before she gained fame for her foresight. As described in 1686's The Strange and Wonderful History of Mother Shipton, little Ursula's body was long but very big-boned, great googling eyes, and very sharp and fiery, a nose of unproportionable length, having it in crooks and turnings, adorned with great pimples which like vapors of brimstone gave such a luster in the night that her nurse needed no other candle to dress her by. With looks like that and the power to see the future, it's no wonder she became known as the Witch of York. As a young girl, she heard other names as well, like the Devil's Bastard, Devil's Daughter, and Hagface. Yet those who dared to insult her may have gotten a taste of Ursula's developing powers. According to an article from 1911, she was said to have had a peculiar power over her school fellows, an ability to pull their hair, pinch them, and throw them to the ground without being near them. By the age of 24, despite her pimpled nose and hag face, Ursula married a carpenter named John Shipton. From then on, she became known as Mother Shipton. Her gifts gained fame gradually, starting with local triumphs such as helping a neighbor find a thief and giving women advice in matters of the heart. Later, she predicted the death of Cardinal Wolsey in 1530. Mother Shipton soon solidified her status as England's greatest soothsayer, and she went on to allegedly predict other events, such as the English Civil War in the mid-1600s, Oliver Cromwell's rise to power, and the restoration of the monarchy. In her own words, "Forth from the north shall mischief blow, and English hob shall add thereto. Mars shall rage as he were wood, and earth shall drunken be with blood. But tells what's next, O cruel fate, a king made martyr at his gate. The just king dead, the wolf shall then with blood usurp the lion's den. But death shall hurry him away, confusion shall a while bear sway, till fate to England shall restore a king to reign as heretofore, who mercy and justice likewise shall in his empire exercise." Following those events, she foresaw the Great Fire of London in 1686, saying, "A time shall happen when a ship shall come sailing up the Thames till it come against London, and the master of the ship shall weep, and the mariners of the ship shall ask him why he weeps, since he hath made so good a voyage. And he shall say, Ah, what a goodly city this was! None in the world comparable to it. Now there is left scarce a house that can let us have drink for our money." Other prophecies included the rise of Queen Elizabeth and her reign, the death of Mary, Queen of Scots, various wars, the gunpowder plot, the reign of James I, the automobile, the telegraph, iron ships, steam engines, tunnels underwater, and aviation. At least these are the stories that have been told over the centuries. Mother Shipton may, however, be more legend than legendary. At least some of her prophecies were admitted as hoaxes in 1873 by Charles Hinley, a publisher who in 1862 reprinted a 17th-century book on Shipton. Hinley took a few liberties in his version by adding lines about things that had already come to pass. For example, "Underwater men shall walk, shall ride, shall sleep, shall talk. In the air men shall be seen, in white, in black, in green." But by the time of his publication, as a 1919 article notes, Aeronautics had reached a primitive stage of development half a century before Hindley wrote, and no fewer than 14 submarines had been patented in England prior to 1727. The prankster also added a few near-future events that caused Shipton believers to panic, like the people of Somerset, England, who were convinced an earthquake and flood would destroy their homes in 1879. Hundreds of families abandoned their homes in fear. Despite the fact that Somerton was not destroyed, people were fooled once again just 2 years later, believing Shipton had foreseen the end of the world. Quote, "And this world to an end shall come in 1881. Thousands across England and other countries were convinced they were doomed. As for the predictions that occurred during Shipton's lifetime, which lasted till 1561, no evidence exists to support any of them as true. Yet, whoever Mother Shipton was, witch, soothsayer, devil's daughter, or just a woman with odd facial features, she's carved her place in the weird annals of history and serves as a reminder of humanity's timeless desire to believe and our ability to find truth in prophecies. I think I was about 12 or 13 at the time, maybe a little older, it's hard to recall. But my stepdad's mom had recently died of lung cancer, and she'd lived about a 5-minute drive across town from us. I had me, my mom, my older sister, 2 younger sisters, younger brother, and stepdad living in an undecorated 2-bedroom semi-detached house. I mean the fact that my stepdad had never put a door on the cellar in that house that led right under the stairs was freaky enough. I was already convinced that house was somewhat unusual. But what was truly eerie was when we up and packed one day on a whim. My grandma's house was 4 bedrooms. Weird, she still lived there even when all her kids had moved out and she was divorced, and she just sent me and my older sister up on bikes to clean out what was left. All the furniture was gone, minus some heirlooms in the garage which had been used as a storage room, the sofas and kitchen, etc., and we just moved in, like that night. She couldn't have been dead for longer than 2 months at that point, but left the house in her will between my stepdad and his 2 siblings, so he agreed to pay them their percentage if they let us live in the house. To be honest, we needed the space. I'll mention that my mom and grandma did not get along. My grandma was a tight, annoying clean freak who wouldn't let you get your mucky paws on any of her things. Ironically, it had been her idea to let us stay there before we moved into the 2-bedroom, but she drove my mom so crazy we moved out to the smaller house early, before it was finished. So a few months along the line, once we'd moved into my grandma's now vacant house, we started talking about getting rid of some of the heirlooms. My mom hated the old granddaughter clock that had been left in the hallway and put it into the garage with the other things. And that's when it started. Now, that clock hadn't worked for years. It was simply an ornament at that point. It hadn't told the time even when my grandma lived there, or when I had lived there temporarily prior. My mom wanted to give it to my stepdad's sister. It was a granddaughter clock, so it would need to be passed to the next woman in the family. But we weren't on great terms with his sister, and so it was put into storage. A couple of nights later, it only starts to ring, like loud, warped ringing at weird times of the night. It rang sporadically too, not with even pauses in between, and it didn't ring to symbolize the hour. No, it rang until you went downstairs into the garage and fiddled with the broken bits and cogs and knocked it off. Then you'd go upstairs, lie in bed, and an hour later or so it'd start all over again. Normally a clock like that would be muffled from the cushioning of the garage door and the kitchen one as you had to go through the kitchen to get there. But it was like it was in my bedroom with me, right next to my head. Sometimes it even did it during the daytime. Eventually, it stopped doing it altogether. The thing just stopped ticking, which it also randomly did on and off. You'd be stood in the kitchen and you'd hear it ticking quietly. Even if you turned on the tap, you'd distinctively hear it. I can't even remember the last time it went off or if we even own it anymore. I don't live with my mom anymore, so I don't know if she got rid of the stupid thing. But I also remember one day when we got a leak. It was right under where the boiler cupboard was upstairs, so nobody seemed too bothered. My stepdad was some kind of handyman, and he just looked at the boiler and said he'd have to get somebody in to fix it as soon as possible. But one day me and my mom, with one of my younger sisters and my eldest sister, were in the kitchen having lunch directly below the boiler. My youngest sister was asleep in her Moses basket in the living room, and my brother was out with my stepdad. To be honest, it was my mom, the skeptic, who pointed this out. Footsteps. Not super heavy ones, just like someone was passing from room to room upstairs. We all froze just listening. My mom just shrugged it off, changing the subject, and it stopped eventually. We carried on eating lunch, but my mom said something. It was something to do with my grandma. I can't remember what, as it was so long ago, but I don't think she said anything malicious or spoke badly of her. It may have just been regarding the belongings we wanted to get rid of to make more room. But something set off the footsteps again as we heard the boiler cupboard door slam. Bear in mind, the only people home were in the kitchen or sleeping in the living room, which was mega weird as we never heard it open. It was a noisy door, too, really squeaky and dragged on the carpet. Then, a bang. Water began to seep through the ceiling, and my mom ran upstairs to find the boiler had exploded at the back. Pipes burst. Water had leaked out into the back wall, which was connected to her built-in wardrobe. It soaked her whole bedroom carpet. I think this happened twice more. I wasn't home for either of them. All the doors and windows had been shut that day too, so nobody had gotten in. And if they had, why would they target our boiler? I'm so glad I don't live there anymore. The woman was already hard to live with when she was alive. Apparently worse when she was dead. Hathorne Hill in Danvers, Massachusetts harbors a beautiful Kirkbridge building with its Gothic-style spires and red brick construction. The judge that presided over the Salem witch trials, John Hathorne, once lived here a few hundred years ago. Perhaps that dark history cursed the building that currently sits on Hathorne Hill. The facility that once housed Danvers State Hospital is now home to a residential community featuring fully renovated apartments. However, the building's dark past makes it one of the creepiest monuments to insane asylums in the world. The idea was that the facility would be self-sustaining, meaning that everything it needed was on-site. The overall design, as seen from the air, looked like a bat in mid-flight. The design supposedly helped draw breezes through the entire facility. Although the building looked beautiful on the outside, inside was a different matter. Danvers State Hospital was originally called the State Lunatic Asylum at Danvers, a cheerful name for sure. It was part of the country-wide concept, at least in the late 1800s, that people with psychological problems needed to be cured inside specifically made facilities. Construction on Danvers State Hospital started in 1874, and the first patients moved in sometime in 1878. At its peak, the facility had 40 buildings and maxed out at 450 patients. The goal of the facility was to completely cure patients of their ills. Danvers was a success at first. By 1900, Danvers State Hospital employed 125 people and had treated more than 9,500 patients since opening. Its good reputation proved to be Danvers' undoing. Over the next 20 years, the population of the hospital swelled to more than 2,000 patients despite its official capacity of 450. Administrators begged the state for money to build more rooms and hire more staff, to no avail. Then, the horrific abuses started. Patients walked through hallways naked. They lived in their own filth from a lack of basic hygiene. People weren't being cured. Their symptoms got worse. Shock therapy and straitjackets became the norm. The thinking was that jolts of electricity could either alter a patient's brain or make the patient afraid of shock therapy and scare them into submission. When they misbehaved, they were put in straitjackets and forgotten. When shock therapy failed, the lobotomies started. In 1939, the medical community was looking for a permanent fix to the crisis facing mental health facilities. The population of the hospital swelled to 2,360. A total of 278 people died at the hospital that year. Medical science saw lobotomies as a cure for anyone's insanity and as a way to stop the deaths. Neurology experts often called Danvers State Hospital the birthplace of the prefrontal lobotomy. The moniker came from its widespread use, but also from the procedure's refinement at the hospital. Visitors to Danvers State Hospital in the early 1940s reported lobotomy patients wandering aimlessly through the halls of the hospital. At least the patients didn't complain because many of them just stared blankly at the walls. Patients walked around in a drugged, hellish daze. No one would let them leave and held them against their will. That is, if patients could express their thoughts of having a portion of their brain ripped out during surgery. The lack of funding continued. Buildings fell into disrepair, which made conditions worse. Finally, the state intervened. Portions of Danvers State Hospital were shut down in 1969. Most of it closed in 1985 before a permanent shutdown in 1992, after which the site became a popular destination for thrill-seeking kids looking for a scare. In 2005, a development company bought the rundown property and tore down a large portion of the buildings. The renovations turned the once macabre lunatic asylum into Avalon Danvers Apartments. Construction faced delays in 2007 when a mysterious fire broke out and burned a majority of the new construction and some trailers. Perhaps the tormented spirits of the dead put a curse on the place. The Hell House on the Hill, one of several unkind yet accurate nicknames for Danvers State Hospital, looks brand new today. However, its reputation remains. Horror novelist H.P. Lovecraft used Danvers as the inspiration for his Arkham Sanitarium. If the name Arkham sounds familiar, DC Comics latched onto the name and created Arkham Asylum as the backdrop for where Batman's ultra-psychotic villains come from. The only remnants of the horrific practices that went on in Danvers State Hospital are the gravestones in 2 nearby cemeteries, which contain 770 bodies. Some headstones only have numbers as opposed to names. Even in death, administrators at Danvers State Hospital did not dignify their patients. Do you like my horrible humor episodes called Mind of Marlar? If so, and you'd like more, it now has its very own podcast. Comedic creeps, sarcastic scares, frivolous frights, macabre madness. Every week I dive into strange history, twisted true crime, and paranormal weirdness. All the stuff you'd expect from me on Weird Darkness, but delivered with dark comedy, satire, and just the right amount of absurdity. Monsters, myths, mysteries, mirth, and more every Monday with Mind of Marlar. I like alliteration, can you tell? You can find a list of where you can subscribe to the podcast at WeirdDarkness.com under the menu tab for podcasts. If the fruits for life of the state of conversion are good, we ought to idealize and venerate it, even though it be a piece of natural psychology. If not, we ought to make short work with it, no matter what supernatural being may have infused it. William James, from The Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902. There is a long tradition of scientists and other intellectuals in the West being casually dismissive of people's spiritual experiences. In 1766, the German philosopher Immanuel Kant declared that people who claim to see spirits, such as his contemporary, the Swedish scientist Emanuel Swedenborg, are mad. Kant, a believer in the immortality of the soul, did not draw on empirical or medical knowledge to make his case, and was not beyond employing a fart joke to get his derision across. If a hypochondriac wind romps in the intestines, it depends on the direction it takes. If it descends, it becomes a fart. If it ascends, it becomes an apparition or sacred inspiration. Another enlightened enemy of other worldly visions was the chemist and devout Christian Joseph Priestley. His own critique of spirit seership in 1791 did not advance scientific arguments either, but presented biblical proof that the only legitimate afterlife was the bodily resurrection of the dead on Judgment Day. However, there is good cause to question the overzealous pathologization of spiritual sightings and ghostly visions. About a century after Kant and Priestley scoffed at such experiences, William James, the father of American scientific psychology, participated in research on the first international census of hallucinations in healthy people. The census was carried out in 1889 through 1897 on behalf of the International Congress of Experimental Psychology and drew on a sample of 17,000 men and women. This survey showed that hallucinations, including ghostly visions, were remarkably widespread, thus severely undermining contemporary medical views of their inherent pathology. But the project was unorthodox in yet another respect because it scrutinized claims of veridical impressions, that is, cases where people report seeing an apparition of a loved one suffering an accident or other crisis which they had in fact undergone, but which the hallucinator couldn't have known about through normal means. The vicinity of such positive findings with ghost stories was reason enough for most intellectuals not to touch the census reports with a barge pole, and the pathological interpretation of hallucinations and visions continued to prevail until the late 20th century. Things slowly began to change in about 1971 when the British Medical Journal published a study on the Rhesus sample. 46.7% reported encounters with their deceased spouses. Most important, 69% perceived these encounters as helpful, whereas only 6% found them unsettling. Many of these experiences, which ranged from a sense of presence to tactile, auditory, and visual impressions indistinguishable from interactions with living persons, continued over years. Rhesus' paper inspired a trickle of fresh studies that confirmed his initial findings. These hallucinations don't seem inherently pathological nor therapeutically undesirable. On the contrary, whatever their ultimate causes, they often appear to provide the bereaved with much-needed strength to carry on. Rhesus' study coincided with writings by a pioneer of the modern hospice movement, the Swiss-American psychiatrist Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, in which she emphasized the prevalence of comforting otherworldly visions reported by dying patients and observations supported by later researchers. Indeed, a 2010 study in the Archives of Gerontology and Geriatrics addressed the need for spectral training for medical personnel regarding these experiences, and in recent years, the academic literature on end-of-life care has recurrently examined the constructive functions of deathbed visions in helping the dying come to terms with impending death. Kubler-Ross was also among the first psychiatrists to write about near-death experiences, or NDEs, reported by survivors of cardiac arrests and other close brushes with death. Certain elements have pervaded popular culture. Impressions of leaving one's body, passing through a tunnel or barrier, encounters with deceased loved ones, a light representing unconditional acceptance, insights of the interconnectedness of all living beings, and so on. Once you ignore the latest clickbait claiming that scientists studying NDEs have either proven life after death or debunked the afterlife by reducing them to brain chemistry, you start to realize that there is a considerable amount of rigorous research published in mainstream medical journals whose consensus is in line with neither of these popular polarizations, but which shows the psychological import of the experiences. For instance, although no two NDEs are identical, they usually have in common that they cause lasting and often dramatic personality changes. Regardless of the survivor's pre-existing spiritual inclinations, they usually form the conviction that death is not the end. Understandably, this finding alone makes a lot of people rather nervous, as one might fear threats to the secular characters of science or even an abuse of NDE research in the service of fire and brimstone evangelism. But the specialist literature provides little justification for such worries. Other attested after-effects of NDEs include dramatic increases in empathy, altruism, and environmental responsibility, as well as strongly reduced competitiveness and consumerism. Virtually all elements of NDEs can also occur in psychedelic mystical experiences induced by substances such as psilocybin and DMT. Trials at institutions such as Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore and Imperial College London have revealed that these experiences can occasion similar personality changes as NDEs, most notably a loss of fear of death and a newfound purpose in life. Psychedelic therapies are now becoming a serious contender in the treatment of severe conditions, including addictions, post-traumatic stress disorder, and treatment-resistant depressions. This brings us back to James, whose arguments in the Varieties of Religious Experience for the pragmatic, clinical, and social value of such transformative episodes have been mostly ignored by the scientific and medical mainstream. If there really are concrete benefits of personality changes following mystical experiences, this might justify a question that's not usually raised. Could it be harmful to follow blindly the standard narrative of Western modernism, according to which materialism is not only the default metaphysics of science but an obligatory philosophy of life demanded by centuries of supposedly linear progress based on allegedly impartial research? Sure, the dangers of gullibility are evident enough in the tragedies caused by religious fanatics, medical quacks, and ruthless politicians. And granted, spiritual worldviews are not approved by everybody. Faith in the ultimate benevolence of the cosmos may strike many as hopelessly irrational. Yet, a century on from James's pragmatic philosophy and psychology of transformative experiences, it might be time to restore a balanced perspective, to acknowledge the damage that's been caused by stigma, misdiagnoses, and mis- or over-medication of individuals reporting weird experiences. One can be personally skeptical of the ultimate validity of mystical beliefs and leave properly theological questions strictly aside, yet still investigate the salutary and prophylactic potential of these phenomena. By making this quasi-clinical proposal, I'm aware that I could be overstepping my boundaries as a historian of Western science studying the means by which transcendental positions have been rendered inherently unscientific over time. However, questions of belief versus evidence are not the exclusive domain of scientific and historical research. In fact, orthodoxy is often crystallized collective bias starting on a subjective level, which, as James himself urged, is a weakness of our nature from which we must free ourselves if we can. No matter if we're committed to scientific orthodoxy or to an open-minded perspective on ghostly visions and other unusual subjective experiences, both will require cultivating a relentless scrutiny of the concrete sources that nourish our most fundamental convictions, including the religious and scientific authorities on which they rest, perhaps a little too willingly. Magic words are often used by magicians whilst performing magic tricks on stage. One of the most common of these incantations is abracadabra. Although this word is known to many, it's likely that fewer people are aware of its origins. Apart from abracadabra, there are several other magic words that are popularly used by stage magicians, Like abracadabra, however, the origins of these words are also a mystery to most people. While abracadabra is commonly used by stage magicians today for the entertainment of the masses, this word is said to have its origins in the ancient Roman world. Back then, this word was not used for performances, but was believed to contain potent magical power within it. According to one theory, the word abracadabra is derived from the Hebrew words Ab, Ben, Ruach, HaKodesh, which translates as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Thus, the word abracadabra is in fact an invocation of the Holy Trinity. According to another theory, this magic word is derived from a different magic word known as abraxas. This word is special as its letters in Greek numerology add up to 365. That is the number of days in a year. Yet another theory for the origin of the word abracadabra is the Aramaic phrase, avracadabra. Fans of the Harry Potter series would perhaps be familiar with this phrase, as a similar spell, Avada Kedavra, is featured in the books. In the Harry Potter series, Avada Kedavra functions as a killing curse, and J.K. Rowling, who authored the books, is said to have drawn inspiration for this spell from the original Aramaic version of it. The original meaning of these magical words, according to Rowling, was "let the thing be destroyed," and it was used for curing illnesses. In any case, abracadabra was used as a talisman over the ages. The 2nd century Roman savant, Serenus Simonicus, for instance, provided a description in his Liber Medicinalis about the way the magic word might be used. This talisman involved the word being written on a piece of parchment repeatedly, with a letter being removed each time until only one is left, leaving what looks like an upside-down triangle pattern made from the letters. In the Middle Ages, people believed that any event that they couldn't explain was possibly caused by magic, and much of the population of medieval Europe deeply feared having an enchantment cast on them, so they used abracadabra to ward off any potential wrongdoing sent in their direction. As in Roman times, it was also used to cure disease. The use of this abracadabra pyramid is mentioned by writers in later ages, including the 16th century. Eva Remington Taylor, who wrote in The Troublesome Voyage of Captain Edward Fenton, "Bannister saith he healed 200 in 1 year of an ague by hanging abracadabra about their necks." And abracadabra was still around in the 18th century, as Daniel Defoe wrote in his 1722 work Journal of the Plague Year, that the superstition was unfortunately being applied during to that epidemic. "People deceived, and this was in wearing charms, philters, exorcisms, amulets, and I know not what preparations to fortify the body with them against the plague, as if the plague was but a kind of possession of an evil spirit, and that it was to be kept off with crossings, signs of the zodiac, papers tied with so many knots, and certain words or figures written on them, as particularly the word abracadabra formed in triangle or pyramid. How the poor people found the insufficiency of those things, and how many of them were afterwards carried away in the dead carts." Eventually, people stopped believing in the efficacy of abracadabra to heal or protect them, and this word became relegated to stage magicians performing magic tricks. Another common magic word is alakazam. This incantation is said to have its origins in the Arabic language, and there is a similar-sounding word in that language, al-qasam, which means oath. It's also been suggested that alakazam is a proper name and that this magic spell was supposed to invoke the powers of a certain person by the name of alakazam. Hocus pocus is another magic word that's often used by magicians. Unlike abracadabra, the origin of this magic phrase lies in the more recent past, around the early 17th century to be more precise. Like abracadabra and alakazam, there are several theories trying to explain the origin of this phrase. One, for instance, is offered by John Tillotson, the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1694. Tillotson suggested that it's a corruption of hoc est corpus mum, this is my body, and is a parody of the consecration during the Catholic Mass. Another suggestion is that the words just sounded exotic, and this pair of words was coined simply because they rhymed. It may be a nonsense word made up solely to impress people during a magic trick. In addition to these traditional magic words, there are also many others that have appeared in more recent times. Some of the better-known ones include bibbidi-bobbidi-boo, used by the fairy godmother in Disney's Cinderella. Shazam is used by DC Comics' Billy Batson to transform into the superhero Captain Marvel. The a la peanut butter sandwiches, which is uttered by the Amazing Mumford in Sesame Street. If you're already a Weirdo family member, please share the podcast with your friends and family on social media, email, and text, and invite them to give it a listen. All stories in this episode are purported to be true, and you can find source links or links to the authors in the show notes. I Moved Into My Dead Grandmother's House is by Kelsey from Your Ghost Stories. The Devil's Daughter is by Mark Hartzman for Weird Historian. Therapeutic Ghosts is by Andreas Summer for Aeon. The Infamy of Danvers State Hospital is by William DeLong for All That's Interesting. And Say the Magic Word is from Ancient Origins. Weird Darkness is a registered trademark of Marlar House Productions. And now that we're coming out of the dark, I'll leave you with a little light. Proverbs 29 verse 23. A man's pride brings him low, but a man of lowly spirit gains honor. And a final thought. How you make others feel about themselves says a lot about you. I'm Darren Marlar. Thanks for joining me in the Weird Darkness.